Hi, this is Mr. Evans. This video is going to introduce the competitive environment and look at Porter's 5 forces. So, quick overview of the unit. This is Unit 3.7, Section 7, and we're looking at the competitive environment. So, to put this in context, Unit 3.7 is all about the process of strategic planning. And strategic planning involves setting a mission statement, identifying the objectives you need to achieve to reach your mission statement, and setting a strategy that will then help you achieve your objective, which therefore work towards achieving your mission statement. Now, an important part of this strategic planning process is for an organisation to undertake a SWOT analysis. And the SWOT analysis involves looking at your strengths and weaknesses internally to the business. So what we're doing there, we're conducting an audit of each functional area: marketing, finance, operations and human resources, and we're looking at, okay, what are our strengths and weaknesses within each of these areas. Once we know what our strengths and weaknesses are as an organisation, we want to start looking outside the organisation at the external environment, and one way we can do that is conducting a PESTLE analysis, whereby we look at changes in the external environment: political, legal, economic, social, technological, etc. And we look at how those environments are changing, we look at the opportunities that are being created there, and we look at the threats. Now, what we want to do, if we're doing this effectively, is we look at our strengths and we look at the opportunities, and we want to combine, we want to match what are our strengths and what are the opportunities out there, and how can we best use our strengths to take advantage of these opportunities, but also be aware that there are these threats out there, and we've got these weaknesses. Now, how can we manage our weaknesses so these threats don't become a problem? And that's really where we are. Now, a PESTLE analysis, you will notice, does not have a C in, and a huge part of the external environment that a business absolutely has to consider in this process of setting a corporate strategy is to consider what's going on in the competitive environment. And what this video is going to do, we're going to look at an overview of the 5 forces model by Porter, and then I'll do a video on each of these little bullet points, making sure we cover everything that we need to on the spec. So first of all, let's make sure we understand what we're talking about with the competitive environment. So we're talking about the nature of a market a business operates in. A market, remember, is a place where buyers and sellers come together to trade goods and services. So buyers are the customers, and sellers are the businesses in that market who are supplying that product. And we're looking at the dynamic relationships, the changing relationships that are going on. In other words, just to put it simply, right, the competitive environment looks at the customers in a market, and it looks at the competitors in the market, the businesses, the firms in the market trying to sell stuff, and we try and work out what's going on with each of those groups. So the 5 forces framework is used to analyse the nature of competition in the market, the degree of competition in a market, and it was come up with by Michael Porter. I believe he's an American professor, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But the point is that by undertaking this 5 forces kind of analysis of the competitive environment, then we know what's going on with customers, we know what's going on with competitors, and we can start to form a strategy. So what does the model look like? So the 5 forces are, first of all, the power of suppliers. Now, the power that your suppliers have over you are going to have an impact on the overall, on your overall level of competitiveness. If you have, say, one powerful supplier, you need this particular raw material for your production process, and you can only get it from one place, well, that supplier is going to have an awful lot of power over your business. They have the power to put the price up, or they have the power, if they're late with the delivery, there's not much you can do about it. Whereas if there's lots of suppliers supplying the goods and services that you need to produce your product, your raw materials, you've got a choice of places to go, and therefore your suppliers have much less power over you. You can play them off against each other, you can get discounts, better credit terms, etc. So the power of suppliers tends to be determined by the number of suppliers that there are. In terms of the power of buyers, well, if you are a company that sells to many consumers who are buying small amounts of product, then each individual consumer doesn't have an awful lot of power over an organisation. Obviously, you'd be sorry if an organisation started shopping at a competitor of yours, but you're not going to lose too much sleep for it. I think when I go out and buy a set of trainers to running shoes or whatever, sometimes I might buy Nike, sometimes I buy Adidas, sometimes Puma. I don't particularly have any loyalty in that market. Now, okay, Nike would rather I buy Nike product, but if I go and buy an Adidas pair of training shoes, then they're not going to be that worried about that, because they've got a large number of small buyers. Now, in industries where there is maybe just one buyer, and you are the supplier to that one buyer, that buyer is going to have an awful lot of power over you. So, for example, if you're a company that makes army uniforms and sells uniforms to the armed forces, the army, and the army decide that they don't want your uniforms anymore, or that somebody's doing a better job and they can get a better price abroad, if the army don't want your product, you're going to be that's going to have a big impact on you as a business. So the threat of new entrants to a market, this is determined by barriers to entry, the things that might stop you from entering a market. So let's just say I see my local barber is driving around in a nice sports car and is going on holiday to Tenerife 5 times a year. Now, it's not beyond the realms of possibility. I'm not saying it's easy to run a barber shop, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility that I could stump together the finance to hire a shop. I could probably, learn how to cut hair reasonably quickly, and I could enter that market because it's attractive to do so. If we're looking at another market, maybe transatlantic flights, flying from London to New York, well, it's not realistic that there's huge barriers to entry stopping me from entering that market. There's legal barriers, for starters, about, things, health and safety. There's huge costs involved in, hiring planes, hiring staff. Need to get a landing slot to Heathrow and JFK. It's not going to happen, is it? So some industries, it's very easy for new competitors to come in and also leave the market. Some industries, it becomes more difficult to do that, and that has an impact on the overall intensity of the rivalry of the industry. Finally, the threat of substitute goods. So let's stick with that idea of airlines. Now, if I want to fly to New York on business, let's say, there's only really one way I can get to New York realistically. Fine, I can sit on a cruise ship for 2 weeks or whatever, but that's not realistic if I'm travelling on business to New York. The only way I'm going to get there is by flying. And so therefore my competitors are the 4 or 5 or 6 or however many airlines it is that operate a route from, say, Gatwick to JFK in New York. So I've only got 6 substitutes. Now then, let's just change that route so it's London to Paris. Okay, we've got BA operating on that route, British Airways running a London to Paris service, but I've also got the low-cost providers. Fine, I've got the other planes, there's Ryanair, there's EasyJet. But in addition to all of those competitors, I've also got coaches go from London to Paris. I could get a coach from London to Paris. I could get the Eurostar from London to Paris. I could go on a train. I can drive and get a ferry. So there's far more substitutes in the short-haul airline market because people can take other forms of transport. If there's a large number of substitute goods that are kind of like yours and do a similar thing, then the nature of that industry tends to be a bit more competitive. So all of those things together form the intensity of the rivalry. But I'll give you an example of how even if there are very kind of different characteristics underneath each of these headings, the intensity of the rivalry within an industry is unique within itself. Okay, so we can guess what's going to happen as a result of looking at these four things, the intensity of rivalry, but the intensity of rivalry is its own force, which we'll see with this example. So let's just say I am running a small business and I'm selling engine parts, and let's just say I'm based in Swindon and there's a big Honda factory at Swindon and I'm making parts for their Honda Accord. Now then, in terms of the power of suppliers, well, I need to buy steel, presumably, to make my products. There's some choice of different providers of steel, but they're, realistically, for a small business in Swindon, maybe I'm not going to have a huge number of suppliers who can meet my needs and provide exactly what I want. So, I'm going to have few suppliers who can meet my needs. All right. At the same time, if I'm making parts specifically for a Honda Accord, then I've only got one buyer. That's Honda. If Honda decide that they want my product because someone can do it cheaper, or there's better alternatives, I can't sell these Accord, parts for the Accord engine to BMW, to Toyota, to any other company, because they're specifically made for our customer. So I don't have much power over my suppliers because there's not many suppliers of steel. I don't have much power over my buyers because I've only got one buyer. Now then, there's some specialist equipment that you're going to need to produce engine parts, and there's some specialist skills, so there are some barriers to entry. It's not just anyone that could start this, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility that there are plenty of other businesses who have the skills and the machinery to provide this sort of equipment. So there's quite a lot of threat of new entrants in this market. Is there the threat of substitute goods? Well, I'm not too sure for the specific product that we're talking about. There's probably not too many substitutes for Honda Accord parts. But you'd have thought the combination of threat of new entrants coming in, only one buyer, and relatively few suppliers would make this quite an intensely rivalrous industry. So let's have a look at a very different industry, which is the supermarket industry in the UK. Now, in terms of the power of suppliers, well, there are lots of suppliers in the supermarket industry. We've got lots of farmers producing goods. We've got a whole world producing, fruit and vegetables and things that we can buy. So there's plenty of suppliers of goods that want to sell to these organisations. So these organisations tend to have a lot of power over their suppliers. And buyers on their own, individual buyers, don't really have much power over them. Okay, Tesco, they'll be disappointed if I go and buy my shopping off Sainsbury's next week, but the 50 quid or so that I'm spending isn't going to, make or break Tesco. In terms of the threat of new entrants, these are huge companies with massive experience of running logistics, skills that I can match, and the finances behind them are incredible. So there's not very many new entrants coming into this market. Audi and Lidl entered the market from Germany, but they were already fairly significant players over there. The threat of new entrants tends to be relatively low. And the threat of substitute goods, well, is there any substitute for food? I could go to the corner shop, but really, if I want quality food, fresh food, at a reasonable price, these supermarkets tend to do it much better than lots of smaller businesses. So not huge numbers of substitutes either. Now, this combination of many suppliers, many buyers, not much chance of new people coming in and threatening market share, and not a huge threat of substitutes for these supermarkets, you'd have thought that this wouldn't be a particularly competitive market, but actually the supermarket industry behaves in a hugely competitive way. So the point is that we need to undertake this analysis because each market is unique. Those interactions between suppliers and consumers is unique in each market. We could look at the banks, and they've got quite a similar structure to this market, these supermarkets, and actually there's not huge intensity of rivalry in there. They're not competing massively for market share against each other. People tend to stay with their own banks, but they're relatively happy to chop and change supermarkets. So the point is that we need to undertake our 5 forces analysis. That is going to explain to us where we are in terms of market forces. That's going to help us set our strategy, and it's a very useful tool to undertake. It's useful to be able to use in exams as well to evaluate the quality of the strategies that are being suggested for a business.